All right, we're on page 944, and we're in Galatians 3, verses 2 to 6. All right, I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? After beginning by means of the Spirit, are you now trying to finish by means of the flesh? Have you experienced so much in vain, if it really was in vain? So again I ask, does God give you His Spirit and work miracles among you by the works of the law or by believing what you heard? So also Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness.
Okay, let's try that again. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, yes. My name is Amy, and I'm one of the pastors here. And I want to tell you about when we first moved here, and our daughter was coming from another school, transferring to school here, and she was in grade 1. And in Victoria, which is where we came from, alleyways behind houses is not really a thing in most of Victoria. And so alleys were not a familiar concept to me. And so her school actually backs onto an alleyway. It's where the teachers park, and some of the classrooms kind of let out along that way. And so it's quite busy. And there was actually signs around the school that would say, please don't drop your kids off here, staff parking only, please don't drive through here, park on the street, da da da. And they would send it out in like the weekly email every week, please don't drive through the alleyway, do not drive through the alleyway, please don't drop your kids off in the alleyway. And so it was like, if there was one thing I learned very quickly, do not drive through the alleyway. And if you know me, I am a rule keeper, almost like embarrassingly a rule keeper. If there is a rule on a sign, I will follow it because I do not want to get in trouble. I am a firstborn child, you guys. It's just natural. So anyways, one day as I was dropping my daughter off, this man begins to drive through the alleyway quite quickly. And there's another woman there who was kind of the lady that would put out the signs, and she would like patrol. And she approaches this car and she leans into the window and she says, you can't drive through here, you can't go through here. And I can hear him quite aggressively saying, I'm driving through here. Da, da, da. He's responding to her. So I thought, here's a chance to make a fellow rule follower friend. And I said, sir, you cannot drive through here. It is not safe. You have to drop your kids off on the street. And I get right in, we are in this together, lady. And the guy finally gets a word in between the two of us and goes, that's my house. Oh, have a great day, sir. Hope you have a great day. Yes. Anyway, as we continue our conversation around the thought around hard conversations, today we are going to talk about listening. And if you were here last week, Jordan kicked us off, and he was discussing what it looks like and what the value is behind having hard conversations, that words are powerful. And to be intentional and go beyond the comfortable surface that we often stay at with other people, and go to the places where honesty and vulnerability do bring greater depth and substance to our relationships. Now, I don't know about you, but in hearing a talk like that, it challenged me to examine the places and spaces perhaps I've been avoiding having hard conversations. And in being somebody who wants to be proactive and making a move towards health and clarity and approaching others, I'm examining who in my life do I need to have a hard conversation with and that kind of thing. But then in our small group this week, as we were discussing the talk, somebody brought up the good point about what does it mean to be on the other side of a hard conversation, as in being the one approached. Being the one to receive a hard truth or to be open to sharing as somebody tells their experience of what's currently going on for them. Now, One of the best parts for me about getting to come to church and communicate a teaching is often, I think if you're doing it right, you're not just coming and sharing what you know, but you're sharing what you're learning. And listening is a challenging area for me. If you've met me, if actually this is your first encounter with me, it is probably already starting to paint a bit of a picture that I can talk all day long. My mom used to say, "Amy, is your tongue tired?" Because my ears are tired. I will talk if it means avoiding a hard conversation, the elephant in the room, and the most dreaded of dreaded things, the long silence of nobody talking at all. I can come up with just about anything to talk about. So hear me today when I say we are journeying together, okay? This is together. All right, so today we're going to examine listening in 4 parts. The need for listening, the challenge of listening, the Christian responsibility of listening, and we'll end with some tips and tricks for you to put in that doggy bag right next to the extra rolls and the turkey you're going to take home this afternoon. So first, why is listening important? B. Joseph Pine, in his book, The Experience Economy, says, the experience of being understood versus being interpreted is so compelling you can charge admission. Meaning, this is literally why people pay for therapy. We long to be seen, to be understood. I think it's actually why some people are addicted to personality tests. If I could just understand myself a little bit better, I'm actually mostly talking about me. Or others, horoscopes. Are you an Aries? You're totally like Aries vibes. They're trying to understand you. Well, I can't do that. I'm a Capricorn. I actually have no idea what I just said. So if that actually tracks for you, I don't know. But to be understood is something we are all in pursuit of. It's actually one of the weirdest but greatest love language moments for me when after a social situation or experience, Jordan and I get back in the car and Jordan says to me, all I could think in that moment was Amy is hating this right now. Because Jordan knows me. He understands the discomfort I might feel when a large, masked mascot comes up to me and starts trying to get me to dance with them. I have no idea who's in that costume, and I feel very, very uncomfortable. And Jordan knows this. Jordan knows how I felt in that moment, and even in this completely hypothetical situation, I feel so loved because he knows me. He knows how I feel because he's heard me. Is it possible in a day that is rife with mental health crisis, loneliness, and putting our every feeling in our public journal of social media, that our souls are deprived of oxygen because we do not get the opportunity to be seen or understood truly deeply by another? We are simply categorized, assumed, and interpreted. I took some time with our very own Isabella Wade this week, who is just at the very tail end of her master's degree in clinical counseling. And I said, can I call you? I have some questions around listening. And so I said, I want to hear from you about what is the value of listening? What does it look like when somebody comes in to sit down with you and is explaining their experience? And basically, what I took from my conversation with Bella is that the need to be heard is crucial to the human experience. When we do not feel truly heard, it provokes questions of, do I matter? Do people care? It's incredibly isolating. It's incredibly lonely. Whether it's a shared experience of a support group who've also lost a spouse, walking through a terminal illness, or having a loved one battling addiction, or it's across the table at a coffee shop with a friend who looks you in the eye, doesn't zone out, and knows all the history that led up to that point, the feeling of being seen and heard is crucial. I actually think, this is a hot take by the way, I actually think that's why everybody on social media is now an advocate. It's always like advocating for dyslexic pug dogs. And you're like, That's not a thing. Like, what? And it's like, I now have made my entire personality about advocating for Charlie, the pug with dyslexia. And I'm like, pardon me? And it's because we are looking for somebody to come alongside us for understanding and acknowledgement, or they want to support others that are traveling the very long, lonely road of dogs with dyslexia. Everybody's an advocate. They have one experience and they're like, I am an advocate of this very particular experience that I have had. We are looking for acknowledgement and solidarity. That's my hot take. Take it or leave it. Cut that out of the video. The human desire to be connected, to be heard, not to be talked at, but to be talked with. What is that? That is someone on the other side listening. Did you know that trauma is not simply trauma? Trauma is not created equally. How you experience an event plays a huge factor in the long-term effects of the event. What might be a bit of a frightening experience for you might be life upending and perpetually anxiety-inducing for another. Why? In his dated and perhaps controversially titled book, Prescriptions for a Tired Housewife, Dr. James Dobson observes, for some strange reason, human beings tolerate stress and pressure much more easily if at least one other person knows they are enduring it. There is something to being seen and heard. When somebody endures a traumatic event, the people who walk with them afterwards, or don't walk with them as the case may be, add or negate the trauma. When I was a new mom, I was the first out of my friend group to have a baby, and I will never forget the nights. Sleep was a bit of an issue. My dear husband is an amazing father and an amazing dad, but he still had to go to work. And Jordan doesn't do well on little sleep, and we were like, your coworkers still need to like you, so we're gonna let you sleep for the bulk of the night, and I will do the nights. But I remember dreading the nighttime, because the nights were lonely. Nobody else was awake. There was nobody else I could text. And I remember every single night. I actually remember friends getting into their car in front of me after a Christmas party. Our baby was like 3 weeks old at that point. And I remember going, Laura and James are gonna go home and they're gonna go to bed. They could like watch a show and then they'll sleep until the morning. I'm never gonna sleep again. Like, I don't know what tonight will look like. Will I have like 20 minutes or 3 hours? I don't know. And Jordan's like, okay, I'm sorry about that. Isolation is traumatizing. Loneliness is traumatizing. And the key to combating this is listening. It is at least one other person knowing what you're enduring. Listening. Okay, we get it. Listening is important. But why is listening included in our hard conversation series? Why is listening hard? Susan Scott, in her book, Fierce Conversation, says, for many people, the answer to the question, what's the opposite of talking, is waiting to talk. I don't know about you, but I am certainly guilty of this. The other person begins, and I listen to like a sentence and a half, and if I like what they're saying, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, because I have like 45 things I want to tell them about the thing that they just started talking about. Or if I don't like what they're talking about, I have 45 things to tell them to counteract what they just said. I have barely listened to a full sentence. And the reason listening is included in this series is because I am fairly confident I'm not alone in this. Listening, truly listening in conversation with another is hard. Listening to others is challenging, especially in today's frenetic, polarized culture for many reasons. These are just a brief summation of the various barriers that complicate our ability to actively and empathetically listen to others. Please don't raise your hand, but absolutely check engine light, okay? 1, judgment and assumptions. Labeling. We quickly categorize people. They're conservative. I saw they had a rainbow keychain. They like Joel Osteen. I saw them reading Harry Potter once. And we assume we know their views. We have our preconceived notions. We believe we already understand their feelings and who they are without engaging. 2, we have an agenda behind our listening. We listen to respond. We're primarily listening to figure out what we'll say next. I don't know, this is really embarrassing because I am a pastor, but often when I ask them their name and go to shake their hand, I'm actually thinking about if my hand is sweaty. And they tell me their name, and I'm like, great, is my hand sweaty? What was their name? I have no idea. And I can't ask again because they just told me their name. And I don't know, because I am thinking about something else. I am not actually thinking about them. Or, as I said earlier, we listen to critique. We want to listen and getcha so that we can say, I've definitely been guilty of asking a question. I already know that they've got a certain view on that, but I want them to say it so I can tell them what they really should think about that. Number 3, and no surprise, is busyness and prioritization. We are too busy. We don't have the time. The perception is it takes too long to genuinely hear somebody out when they are talking about the deeper things in their life. I barely have time to listen to my own thoughts, let alone the rambling thoughts of somebody else. Indifference and apathy. We're disinterested. Their opinions in particular, seem irrelevant because they don't align with my beliefs. I heard them say climate change is a scam and they believe Oprah is the Antichrist. No, thank you. I do not need your opinion. I've heard quite enough. Thank you very much. Or we're protecting our own personal space. We avoid potentially negative interactions to maintain our emotional well-being. Public service announcement. Today is Thanksgiving. If you have a family dinner, you might have people coming that you are not normally in the same room with. We have an election coming up. We have an election south of the border. There's a lot of elections, and there's also pumpkin pie, which I have learned living in a household with multiple cultures is also a very controversial topic if pumpkin should go in the pie. Okay, so we just avoid the hot button topics. We're not talking about politics. We're not talking about pumpkin pie. And, give or take if we're going to talk about Taylor Swift, because that's also very controversial for some people. So we're just not going to talk at all. We'll just stay on the surface. Let's talk. The weather's been great, so we can continue to talk about the great weather. Though Jordan did tell me that spiders are making very big webs this year, which is an indication that the winter is going to be cold. Take that fact with you, okay? Leave the politics out of it. Fear and uncertainty. I actually believe this comes from a really good place. But we're afraid of offending another. We're concerned about saying the wrong thing or triggering a conflict that leads to somewhere we don't want to go. What if I invite them to church and they key my car? What if they're so insulted that I would invite them to my church? Or maybe, and I know this is me, maybe we're afraid because we're not sure how to ask. How's your mom doing in her battle with cancer? I don't want to make it awkward. What if they're upset that I asked? To truly connect deeply with the soul of another, it doesn't come easily to our limited dopamine craving attention spans, nor does listening to others who aren't on the same page as us, when we often feel if you're not with me, you're against me. But to listen well takes time to hear the other out. It's challenging. But if you're new to Forest City, you might not be aware of our mission statement: to foster a community that champions health by practicing the way of Jesus. Meaning, in light of the common human need to be seen and understood and our common lack of an attention span, it begs the question: is it just social decorum to listen politely? Or are there ways in which being followers of Jesus should inform the way we listen? I'm going to give 3 quick caveats. 1, this isn't about kicking boundaries to the curb. This is a message about encouraging the examination of habits and excuses. 2, listening is not agreement. You can listen well and not have to agree. We'll save the message for discernment and wisdom for another day, but I'll sum it up with this quote. This is a fantastic podcast, by the way. It's about American politics, but Sarah Stewart Holland and her cohort have a podcast called Pantsuit Politics, and they have a book called I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. And this is a fabulous quote. We are not the boss of anyone else, and grace shows us that others don't have to comply with our worldview in order to be worthy of sharing our world. 3, now this is speaking to a future caveat, which I'll get to in a minute. It is not a knock against medical professionals. We strongly believe in integrated healthcare, including counseling. Trust me, big fans. Do I believe God is the great physician? Absolutely. Will he ultimately heal and redeem all our infirmities? Absolutely. But I also do take Tylenol when I have a headache. Okay? Keep that in your back pocket for when I start this next section. Okay, the call. How does listening as Christians make us different? Christians have a responsibility to be the best listeners. Why? Because it is listening that has changed our lives. Think of it this way. We'll call this the thesis of hearing. In Galatians chapter 3, Paul is speaking to the church, and he says, I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish after beginning by means of the Spirit, are you now trying to finish by means of the flesh? Have you experienced so much in vain, if it was really in vain? So again, I ask, does God give you his Spirit and work miracles among you by the works of the law or by your believing what you heard? So Abraham believed, and it was credited to him as righteousness. True faith requires listening. Listening is receiving the truth of what Christ has done for you. When we receive that message, it changes your entire life. It sets you free. It brings forgiveness. It brings new life. It brings new identity, not you toiling and sweating and working and making a name for yourself, but learning of the cross of Christ opened your eyes to the acceptance and the power of a spiritual reality. Listening is the means to which action or change can result. Our responsibility as followers of Christ should go further than just hearing as we walk alongside our family members, our coworkers, our friends, our neighbors. There is a truth that allows us to embrace anyone with equal grace-filled footing. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in this great little book called Life Together, the Classic Exploration of Christian Community, makes a very compelling argument for Christian listening. I actually argued with myself if I should just stand up here and read the chapter on listening because it was just really good, but I've condensed. In the presence of a psychiatrist, I can only be a sick man. In the presence of a Christian brother, I can dare be a sinner. The psychiatrist must first search my heart, and yet he never plumbs its ultimate depth. The Christian brother knows when I come to him, here is a sinner like myself, a godless man who wants to confess and yearn for God's forgiveness. The psychiatrist views me as if there were no God. The brother views me as I am before the judging and merciful God in the cross of Jesus Christ. To put it another way, even the very best of modern medicine and psychology do not have a framework for the spiritual misalignment of the human heart. All pain is evidence of the sin that has entered the world. As Christians, we share this common truth. Pain, suffering, brokenness are the plight of the human heart. The resulting wounds leave holes in our hearts in ways that shouldn't exist but do. When we communicate our pain, our proclivities, and our shame to another, because of the grace and understanding of our own humanity and sin, it allows us to hear the words of another on level ground. Not better, not worse, not a project, but amazing grace, how sweet the sound. to save a wretch like me. We are equalized by both the commonality of humanity and comforted by the equitable grace and fulfillment of Christ. Do you understand what I'm saying? That when you look at people just as they've got this problem or they've got that issue or that's a thing, we look at people as a problem to be solved. Versus recognizing that every pain and every ache comes from a common hole in the heart of humanity. That we can say, me too. Even if it's not the same, we can say, me too. Scripture warns us against placing ourselves above another, giving advice from a place of pride or all-knowingness. In Proverbs 18, verses 12 and 13, before a downfall, the heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor. To answer before listening, that is folly and shame. Parking lot politics, okay? Just really should have listened before I started talking. You're listening not just to hear, but to receive the other person, to receive their pain, their experience on the equal ground of grace and humility. Peter Senge says, among the tribes of northern Natal in South Africa, the most common greeting equivalent to hello in English is the expression, Sawubona, which means, I see you. If you are a member of the tribe, you might reply by saying, Sikhona, or I am here. The order of the exchange is important because until you see me, it is as if I do not exist. When you see me, you bring me into existence. Listening affirms people. When we lean in and listen, we invite others to exist. Listening in itself is a ministry because the reality is what you believe about people will absolutely affect what you hear from them. What do you believe? Is this person an inconvenience or an image bearer of Christ with the same deserving opportunity to experience the life-changing reality of Christ's grace and forgiveness and love? Okay, let's get to the doggy bag, shall we? The application. 1, true listening requires humility and openness. Okay, perhaps you've convinced yourself, yes, listening is important. I do this very well. Do you? Here's a test. For those in the room who would say they spend time with God in, prayer and silence and solitude, how much of your time do you actually spend receiving from the Lord versus talking to the Lord? I'm actually not calling you out, I'm calling me out. As you already know, I have the gift of gab. The practice of listening is what makes us effective disciples. Listening is the gateway to deep, transformative relationships. This is really hard, but it is a really good litmus test of if we're good at waiting, if we're good at listening, or do we fill the silence with words? And along with that, its buddy is embracing change. Effective listening is not just about hearing words, it's about being willing to let those words impact us. This requires humility. We must set aside our preconceived notions and judgments. Again, even in our relationship with God, sometimes people are like, God doesn't speak to me. Does God not speak to you? Or are you not honestly listening? You have an expectation of how God will speak to you. Or the things that God is asking you to do, you're like, I hear that, but what else? And we ignore what God is saying. We have to be prepared for change. True listening requires an openness to change. The great Alan Alda, if you're a MASH fan in the room, listening is being able to be changed by the other person. Am I willing? Am I willing to adjust my opinion? Am I willing to adjust my understanding? Listening, this is the part that gets me. Listening is what grows us. When we're talking, we're saying things we already know. This is not new information to us. Listening is the opportunity to hear from another. And we see this. I just think the Pharisees are so wonderful because they're us, let's be honest. We see this in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus is spending all this time, this is in chapter 11, and he's talking about your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eyes are healthy, your whole body is also full of light. And when you're unhealthy, your body is full of darkness. And so it's going on and on about how the inner soul, the inner being is really where spiritual health comes from. And then Jesus finishes talking, and one of the Pharisees is like, yeah, celebrity Jesus, why don't you come over to my house for dinner? And so he comes over, and then all the Pharisees are like, ooh. Did you see the way he didn't wash his hands properly? And this has nothing to do with like cleanliness of like those signs, all employees must wash their hands before they return to work. It's not one of those types of things. It's like he did not follow the rituals as we have set out. This will distance him from God. There is judgment, and they are very concerned. So they tell Jesus this. And Jesus does not take kindly. He's a good listener, by the way, just to clarify. But Jesus says back to them, he's like, did you miss everything I just said? Did you listen to anything I just said? It does not come from the outside, but from the inside is what makes a man clean or unclean. They missed it because they weren't listening. They were like, yeah, we know. Jesus did not wash his hands correctly. There's going to be some big issues with the big guy up there. We need to approach conversations with an open heart, ready to learn from the other person's experience. And again, listening does not mean agreement. But an added bonus, and perhaps this is a helpful reframe, leverage the gift of your limitations. Acknowledging that we don't have all the answers or a complete understanding of another person's perspective allows us to engage better. When we can say, I don't know everything there is to know about XYZ, or just anything in general. If I don't know, I can take this opportunity to learn from that person. The shift in mindset can transform conversations into opportunities for growth and deeper understanding, both for ourselves and the person speaking. Listening is an active practice. Commit to presence. Listening is not passive. My kids know when I'm listening and when I'm not, and they're little. Turn off your phone. If you've committed to saying, I'm going to be with this person right now, look at them. Make eye contact. Spend time with them. Be with them. Make that time count. I am the number one suspect of this. I'm like, I can do 17 things at once. What did you say? And as they continue to talk, you'll recognize, this has come around once or twice. What's the thing beneath the thing? What is this person actually saying to me versus what are their words saying? It's not just the content, here's some more Bella wisdom. It's not just the content that you need to understand all the pieces and players, but it's the acknowledgement and presenting yourself in a way that communicates, I hear you and I see you. This takes practice, friends. This is the practice of listening. We are going to have to come back to this again and again and examine ourselves and maybe be open to I didn't really feel like you were listening when I was telling you that. It's a practice. Third, listening as a channel of compassion. When we create a safe space, when we prioritize our attention to this person and we prioritize listening, we are creating a place that they feel free to express themselves without fear of judgment or interruption or immediate solutions. Proverbs says, the purpose of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding will draw them out. We learn more and can minister more effectively to those aches and pains and wounds of the soul of others when we follow the example of Jesus. We see this with the woman at the well. She comes and he asks her for a drink of water, and it starts off kind of this conversation, but as he continues to talk to her and continues to ask her questions, she reveals more and more about her life and who she is. And eventually it ends with her going to her village and saying, come and see this man who knows me, who knows everything I've done. When we engage with people and we go below the surface and we ask the questions and we listen, it gives us an opportunity to draw people out and find out what is really going on. And lastly, I'm inviting the worship team back up. And perhaps the most important part of listening is reflecting God's love. To be a conduit of God's love and presence Many times, God simply wants to use us as a channel of his affirming love as we listen with compassion and understanding. As the other person finds security in this acceptance, he begins to believe God loves him. In the atmosphere of affirmation, man, that sounds hard. That sounds difficult. I'm so sorry you're going through that. God is able to work with this person, and the results are much better than anything I could come up with, any of my feeble ideas. Bonhoeffer says, often a person can be helped merely by having somebody who will listen to him seriously. At times, what our neighbor needs most is for someone else to know. Similar to what Dr. Dobson said. To put more emphasis on affirmation of love and acceptance than stressing about trying to have the right answers or solutions. If I ask that question, I don't know what I would say. Friends, you don't have to know what to say, but you can listen well. So to circle back, Forest City is a place we're baked right into our values to prioritize people, to create clarity, and pursue growth. All of those things happen when we listen well. But to be involved in a community takes practice. It takes inconvenience. It takes getting into the trenches with people. But that is where the beauty of community blooms. When you're walking through things together, when people are sharing the deepest parts of who they are, of the things they're working with. It builds bonds, it builds trust, it builds openness and understanding. This doesn't happen all at once. A garden is not planted and blooms in a day. But that is who Forest City strives to be. Our world desperately, desperately needs people who will listen well and say, I see you. I hear you. It takes courage and it takes a caring heart, and it is not easy. A fourth grade teacher once asked her class, what is listening? After a few moments of silence, one little girl raised her hand and said, listening is wanting to hear. Lord, make us people who want to hear, who want to be slow to speak and quick to listen, who care about the concerns and difficulties of another. Lord, today we just ask that you would give us a yearning and a deeper desire, that you would be working in our spirits. You would give us stillness. You would give us pause to the things that are going on in the lives around us, perhaps tonight at the dinner table. God, I just pray that our souls would mingle with the souls of others, that people would feel brought into community. So we love you, Lord. We just ask that you would continue to work in and throughout Forest City as we end today and go our separate ways to our homes and workplaces. May we be people who listen well. May we be people who are a vessel of your love and compassion that others are able to receive as they pour out. Thank you, Lord. Amen. I could ask you to stand with me.